We are delighted that you're joining us for another podcast of Wake Up Aligned, and it is the podcast for chiropractors where we get to talk about chiropractic lifestyle, and topics of interest. You can contact us through our email, and that is mailbag@amcfamily.com. Welcome back. We are here with Tom Owen and Dr. Tara Horrell, and this is Wake Up Aligned, the podcast for chiropractors and people interested in topics of interest to chiropractors. We have been getting some really wonderful feedback lately from you, the listeners, and I want to tell you how much that means to us and how important it is to us. We get that through regular snail mail, but we've also been getting that in our email. By the way, that email is mailbag@amcfamily.com. So if you want to give us a shout out, if you have an idea for a future episode, or if you have some questions, I want you to feel free and be encouraged to use that email and communicate with us. We love hearing your feedback, and we certainly do appreciate all the encouragement and all the positive stuff that you sent our way. Tom, I know that you recently got a thank you note from somebody who just expressed the gratitude for us putting this together, and I know that was important to you because you sent me a text message with the picture of it. So if you don't mind, just tell everybody how important that is to you.
Yeah, so Dr. Shannon, on that note, that I did receive a note. It was actually from Dr. Mitchell Robinson, and who is an associate with the one and only Dr. Henri Dalliers. And yeah, it was very, very thoughtful for him to drop that note, but just to know on a weekly basis that our efforts that we're trying to feed into chiropractors and chiropractic overall inspires me. You know, it's that as Dr. Owen always said, no good effort is ever wasted. And that's what we're trying to do, is to inspire and empower chiropractors in particular. And Dr. Robinson is got a very bright future. That office in itself is firing on all cylinders. They just recently had their largest month production collections in the history of that practice, and that's no small practice. Obviously, we know Dr. Dalliers was a right starter with AMC way back in, I want to say 99, I believe, is when they finally opened. So here we are, over 2 decades later, and they're still growing. There's still room to improve, and that's something that Dr. Dalliers has always had. He's always remained humble, and he's always remained teachable. And most people would not put those two attributes as key factors, or wouldn't know that those two key factors are probably some of the most important of leadership to growth, because most people get to a particular point and they stop being teachable. They stop taking in. And Dr. Dalliers has always remained green and growing. So that office itself is just always been special in my heart. Dr. Dalliers is probably the most genuine and considerate person I've ever come across. And we're lucky to have him as an AMC member. We're lucky to have him as an instructor. And the chiropractic's lucky to have him in the KCUCS work that they do. So yes, the point is, you give me the microphone and I just start talking. But yes, we're loving the feedback. The feedback that we're getting is it's astounding to me. You and I started this originally and on an idea of, what do you think about just having conversations with chiropractors every week, of just sitting around the kitchen table and what do we want to talk about? And to take that idea and to find out it's having such an impact has really been eye-opening to me. We just recently had a summit meeting in Atlanta, And it was just one after another person walking up and going, man, that podcast, I can't wait till Monday morning. And that's not anything that you and I would have expected. So yes, keep the feedback coming. It inspires us. Also, it helps to, in that inspiration, to ignite our creativity as to what areas do we want to go? What needs do we need to fill? Because that's what this is about. This is not about Dr. Shannon McMurtry or Dr. Tom or Tom Owen. This is about chiropractors and the lives of chiropractors and how that can be improved and inspired and empowered. So yes.
Yeah, that summit training weekend we had where Dr. Dalliers got to tell his story of his most recent improvement in the office. That was tremendous. He gave a great what we call a testimonial, and we had some other people have a highlight weekend as well. We had Dr. Amy Rutter and her associate Dr. Karen Johnson had a big weekend, lots of awards, and Dr. Tyler Edge, which is another Right Starter, right? Right Starters are not all we do, but I don't know anybody that does them as well as we do. So that's a great segue to our guest today, Dr. Tara Horrell. Dr. Tara, say hi to everybody, please.
Hey, gang.
Hey, gang. Nice. Okay.
You clearly didn't go to the same school as me.
That's right. That's right.
Because there was a teacher that every day would say, hey, gang. Or then Dr. Barge would say, good morning, fledgling chiropractors.
Maybe we should. No, I'm not going to start with that. I'm not going to copy anybody else. I can't do that. Well, Dr. Terry, you're here for a reason. You're here for a purpose. And I'd like to really just turn it over to you and hear you speak from the heart about what it is that you're doing with Right Start and why is it so important for students to get started the right way and not make the mistakes we've seen other people make? So I know that's a big, broad subject, but you got a lot of heart about this, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, heavens. Well, I'll try not to talk too much, but, you were talking about Dr. Dalliers, and he's one of the folks who speaks to students on that teaching team with me. He goes to Sherman, shares with those students. And, it's interesting to me, the things that students are taught, the things that well-meaning, kind, helpful professors put into chiropractors' minds, into young chiropractors' minds. And, we always talk about that you can't outgrow your concepts. The problem with that is that many students are having their concepts formed by people who have really bad concepts of chiropractic and of themselves and of business themselves. And so students go out with these really poor chiropractic concepts, business concepts, and concepts of themselves as a chiropractor, as well as poor concepts of patients and what patients will and won't do. And it leads to enormous problems in their practices. So I guess that's where my heart for the student program comes from, because Dr. Owen always said the way a thing starts is the way a thing goes. And if they start out with those poor concepts and bad habits, they have a lot to overcome. And that's if they even know what a chiropractor does, right? So many schools these days aren't even teaching that. And then they have to overcome being told that they have to associate right out of school, or they go into one of those associateships and they learn just like I did, not only bad habits, but just nightmarish things, right? They have the nightmare associateships where, again, my story, my paycheck bounced every 2 weeks. And again, that just led to problems in life, let alone problems in chiropractic practice. So My point is, if we can start a chiropractor off in chiropractic practice the right way, with the right concepts of practice, the right concepts of what patients will and won't do, with the right concept of chiropractic, there's so many hurdles that they don't have to jump on the way to success, that they can just dig that foundation, right? Build the foundation of their practice so that they can scale the practice continually instead of stalling out at not only stalling out in growth, but not being able to really impact their communities and the world for chiropractic like they should.
Sounds like a principle that I once learned, which is the best way to solve a problem is to never have the problem in the first place. Just
That's
close
exactly
the
right.
gate on those. So you mentioned the concepts. I know that you had shared one with me several months ago about an instructor at a very strong, philosophically sound school was telling the students to go out and charge $35 an adjustment or something. And of course, you know, I'm a value person, so I about hit the roof when I heard that. What are some of these really hurtful, challenging concepts that are being poured into the students?
The first 5 years are a struggle. In other words, they go out and they have the expectation that practice is going to be a struggle. And the problem with this, especially the first 5 years thing, is that 65% of small businesses don't even make it through the first 5 years. And if you're expecting a struggle for their first 5 years, so you don't look for help because you just think that's the way it's supposed to be, then you don't make it after those first 5 years. And we lose a lot of really good chiropractors. You know, what the Bible says about lack of knowledge, right? My people perish for lack of knowledge or wisdom, depending upon which translation you read. So these chiropractors who are awesome, you know, have great technique, they have great philosophy, they have great hearts for people and serving people, but they have this idea that they're supposed to struggle, and so they never look for help, and they leave the profession for the wrong reasons.
What she just said, Dr. Shannon, points directly to a stat. The stat is that the vast majority of chiropractors, the longevity of the career of the average chiropractor is 5 years. Now that stat's been standing for a long time. So the average career for a graduate is 5 years. Just think about that for what she just shared. And I don't know if you ever even heard that stat, Dr. Tara, but that correlates with if you come out with the wrong concepts, you don't have a chance. And she's right. Most small businesses, I think it's over half the small businesses are going to fail within the first 5 years. And then over half the ones that make it there don't make it 10 years. So concepts is a critical piece. And what she's talking about is that's getting fed into those young minds that don't really know any better. They're waiting for a trusted voice, and you know, and they're considerate, they're meaningful, they're genuine people, but you got to be careful of what concepts you latch onto. Dr. Owen, I know we quote him a lot, but he always said, man, you better be careful who you hang out with the first 6 months after you graduate. So students, Right Starters are out there, listen to me, because this is absolute spot on fact that whoever you hang out with those first 6 months usually sets the tone for your career. Think about that for a second. You can try and work for 10 years, but whatever that concept was that got planted in there early, when the ground was, you know, ripe for seeds, right? Whatever got in there, it's hard to get out. And it's almost like, I just used the term the seeds. It's like planting a garden. Until you get in there, and if you let the weeds go crazy, it takes a lot of work to get all the weeds out, then fertilize it, then, get the nutrients, get the soil right, just to plant a seed again, right? But if we can get in there early with those students, and you change that concept, then the weeds never got in there in the first place. And all you're doing is nurturing the soil, and then you're planting the seed. And that's how, honestly, that's a big piece of the puzzle of why AMC has nearly 100% success rate in our Right Start program. That's why we do have a 0% SBA default loan percentage, is because of that. If you set the right concepts, then you just have to nurture the soil, right? Then you just have to grow it's all about applying the principles and the components, but those concepts are so critical. And I'll say one more thing here and then throw it back to the two of you, is you were talking about some of the concepts from this past weekend, or not this past weekend, but this past meeting, most latest summit. And it reminded me of the Apex test that Dr. Osborne provided. And then we had a follow-up director meeting not long ago where he went through the results of the Apex test. All right. So all aligned members, listen into this. This is interesting on concepts. We had, 20 or so people pass the test, right? There were certain people that knew the stuff and aced the test. There were several people that didn't ace the test. They didn't even pass it. Yet, some of the people that had all the knowledge that could ace the test have very, very poor concepts, and their production in their business has not been the same as some people that actually failed the test, but they are booming in their practice. Because why? They don't have those constrained, limited beliefs or those limited concepts. And, we talked about one particular doctor, and it was all about the POC. They had a limited belief about the POC and doesn't have the confidence of asking for a referral and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's just plain concept, right? So here you go. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you have the limited concepts, it ain't going to fly, right? Flip it over, have really big concepts, be open to understanding these things, and you don't even have the knowledge, and you can still make it work. And I think that's part of it. Now, let's go back to Dr. Tara and what she's here for. Talk about these students. If you can grow the concepts while you're still in school, and where you can change that frame of thought and get the knowledge and apply the principles that you can find inside a program like Align. That's the reason why, Dr. Terry, you can speak on this, why our Right Starters, they don't struggle for 5 years, do they?
No, I mean, even when I was opening, what would that have been? Let's not talk about it. 17 years ago, I had a very well-meaning chiropractor friend in town who sent me a gift card for Scripesco so that I could buy supplies. Very kind and very generous. But the note said, I know those first 5 years are a struggle, so I thought you would need this. That was never my experience. I made profit my very first month, open with Right Start in my own practice, and never looked back, which is exactly why I sit in this seat, right? Exactly why I go out and speak with students, is because that wasn't my experience. It doesn't need to be their experience. And it doesn't need to be anybody's experience anymore if I have anything to do with it. So yeah, back to your question, which I think was, I don't remember.
It was basically that's not the experience of the AMC members. They don't struggle for 5 years. Our average chiropractor inside a line is hitting profit the first month. I think it's like when you come to a summit, and you get to those Right Start Awards, and you get to the inside of our family, the bronze, the silver, the platinum, double platinum, and all the way up to the ribbons. How often are those right starters that are getting those? Mm-hmm. Why? Because they didn't make all the mistakes, or in some cases, what we're talking about here, they never had the bad concepts get in there. They just don't know any better.
Well, and what's funny about that, Dr. Shannon started out talking about the CVA, right? The value of each visit in a chiropractor's office. And I think it almost shocks us sometimes how these right starters will come out of the gate when their concepts are set properly, without the problems that seasoned chiropractors, those 25-year graduates have with value. A lot of our right starters are collecting, at least the ones that I coach, between $75 and $100 a visit. And to start out that way, look, chiropractors that are out there, wouldn't you have liked to started $100 collected per visit versus where you're at now, and not have to break through that particular concept of value in your own practice? I know that would have been, even though I did very well, the practice I was in before, we did Let's Make a Deal Chiropractic. So before I got into AMC, it was, adjustment was $30, and we would do 2 for 1. Or, oh, you can't do 30? How about 15? How about $10? How about $5? Which is why my paychecks were bouncing, right? Because the collections weren't there. So again, how different would that experience have been? How different would the patient's experience, the patient's value for what we do, the results that they would have gotten if the CVA would have been $75 to $100 in that office? It would have been considerably different. I can tell that much. Not only that, our referrals would have been a lot better, and all that. So nothing I can do about the past, but I sure can do a lot, or at least what I can do about going out and changing the future for as many students or future chiropractors as I possibly can.
I'd like to hear the two of you talk about, just for a second, from a statistical standpoint, of when you come out with those concepts and you come out with a CVA that you're talking about of $100, what that does for the right starter from a standpoint of patient compliance. The value, you just said something, what that value means to the patient. I don't think everyone that comes out with those limited concepts, right, and they come out and they have the struggles that you're describing that evidently all graduates are supposed to have, but they don't understand, well, man, how could I ever, I just can't imagine my CVA going from 50 to 100, because people are going to run for the hills and they're not going to accept. But the reality is, it's
they must be in a big city.
They must be in a big city.
White collar market.
But the actuality, I can hear Dr. Shannon. I could just see him. He's ready to give me the microphone for a second. But what does that do from the doctor-patient relationship? It actually improves, and the patient compliance and the retention, it improves with those kind of values. The referrals that would come into the office, that's all based. I'll give you guys a chance to talk about that, but I hope the listener understands that's what we're talking about when we say concepts. Mm-hmm. You put a limited belief and a limited concept in place, you can't break it. You cannot outgrow a concept. Can't be done in life, not in chiropractic. It can't be, you can't do it.
You can change the concept.
What's that?
You can change the concept.
You can change the concept, because that's why they said once the mind of man has been stretched, it can never take its original form again. Because once you stretch it, once you change that concept,
Look out.
You can't, wait a minute, I could never go back and think that way again. But you've got to be willing to look at it, right? Mm-hmm. That's the difficult thing, is rigidity of that concept. You've got to be willing to stretch it, because sometimes that stretching is a painful process. But I know, Dr. Shannon, you were ready to jump in on that when I was talking about what the value concept does just to an overall practice, what it really means across the whole culture of the practice, the results of the practice, the experience, the fulfillment of the doctor, and it all starts with a concept.
Yeah, I mean, you give me the opportunity to talk on that, I'm going to preach a sermon. All right, we're going to pass the collection plate at the end of this podcast, because it gets me fired up. Before I comment on that, though, I'm thinking about all the right starters, including me, who did it the right way. And, we have a lot of listeners who, they came to us after they opened, right? They were not right starters. I just want to encourage everyone who started the right way or now has the right way of achieving their dreams in their practice. Just be grateful every single day that you are avoiding these bad concepts and this bad advice, and you're not saddled with all that stress and all that anxiety and all that what if and what's to come. I mean, that's a gift that's worth more than money, honestly. So let's talk about what you threw there to me, Tom, and that's the value, and how does that value affect the doctor-patient relationship? There's a quote, and I think it's by Thomas Paine: "What you acquire too cheaply, you esteem too lightly." And this is true for anything. All right, it's human nature. So here's a great example that most of us are familiar with. You remember when you were in high school and the hotshot kid or the hotshot girl got their new Camaro, their brand new Mustang, right? You look at that car 2 years later and it's a pile of junk. Why? They didn't earn that car. They didn't put in any sweat equity. They didn't respect it. They got it too cheaply. They esteemed it too lightly. On the other side, you got somebody working night jobs, mowing lawns, whatever, to buy their first car, and it's a piece of junk. That thing is washed, it's cleaned, right? They take care of it because they put in the time, they put in the money, they sacrifice to achieve that. That's a common example most of us are familiar with from our childhood, but it's true in anything, right? It's really true in anything. How it affects the doctor-patient relationship is this. When it's too cheap and the patient gets the results nobody else could provide, all the gods in their white coats at their at the hospitals, and all these specialists with all the degrees behind their name, and they couldn't figure out the problem. They couldn't fix the problem. They couldn't deliver the results. And now the chiropractor does, and they're charging $30, $40, $50 a visit. That patient says internally, well, it must have just got better on its own. There's no respect, there's no value, there's no esteem for what that doctor provided for the patient, because psychologically it doesn't make any sense. Now, this shows up in bad compliance, right? Missed visits. It's a fundamental lack of respect with the doctor. Now, if you can avoid that and you do the other side where you have value, I understand that you may be afraid you're going to limit your market share and not have affordability for your community, whatever that term means. But it's just the opposite, right? Whether you're in a affluent town or a blue collar town, the patients associate good doctors, accomplished doctors, on two basic criteria. Number one, are they busy? That's why we never want to bring in a new patient to an empty office. We always recommend you bring in the patient when there are bring in the new patient when there are other patients booked. And number two, they evaluate how good you are based on how much you charge. Right? You cannot separate that psychological component. You cannot separate that assessment of how good you are as a doctor from that patient. I wish the students knew that. I wish doctors in practice knew that, because you're right. We do have students in our program who come out at these high value concepts because we've planted that into them, right? Mm-hmm. They don't know anything else, and they don't know that they should question it. And yet those students who've listened to that and just shown up for duty, done what they've been told to do, are outpacing doctors in practice for 15, 20, 25 years. Mm-hmm. Should be the other way around, shouldn't it? That 25-year veteran should have more skill, more confidence, more ability to deliver the goods than the student. And yet, many times it's upside down. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Dr. Tara. What would you like to add to that?
How can I add to that?
Did I suck all the oxygen out of the room there, Dr. Tara? I told you I'll start preaching a subject there. I'm sorry.
No, I love the sermon. I love the passion behind it. We always talk about you being the CVA guy. Where did your passion for that come from? How did you get to that?
That's a good question, because I don't know if I've ever shared that on the podcast. I shared that at our summit trainings, but I was having a conversation with Tom's sister, Christy, and Christy has been in chiropractic ever since she was a little girl, working for Dr. Owen, and actually had her own company teaching CA protocols to offices. Anyways, she and I were having a conversation, and we were talking about this AMC aligned system that was put together, and the care plans. Now, I've heard recently, Dr. Tara, that's another concept that the professors are pouring into doctors or students, and they're doing a bad job of it. But I guess that's a subject for another day,
another episode.
But the care plans that they were recommending back in that day had a certain average dollar value per visit recommended, and for some reason, I started looking at what was the value of money in that time period, late 60s, early 70s, and what does that mean to the value of money when I did this exercise, which was in 2015 or 2016. Well, the money was worth to them back then equivalent to $100 per visit in our money supply. Now, this was 5 or 6 years ago now. That value has actually increased because inflation has, been running rampant. But that's how we came up with that $100 per visit. All we did was go back to what chiropractors were doing with this system before insurance came on the scene and destroyed our sense of value. See, once we got into the Mercedes 80s, we did not realize that we were turning over our established value to another group or another entity. And since that moment, they have driven down the value, and it's systematic, and it's planned, and it's intentional, right? That's what we don't that's what we don't really realize. It is a systematic plan to drive us out. So all we did was we got back to the value before that whole thing came on the scene. And unfortunately, we're 40 years later, chiropractors are still reaping the bad dividends of that decision to jump into bed with the insurance companies. Mm-hmm. So that's where the value came from, just stripping it back, getting all that stuff out of the way, getting back to the value established before chiropractors messed up and went down that path of insurance. And that money supply is $100 per visit. Nowadays, it's really more like 115, 120 a visit.
Mm-hmm. So you took out the emotion and
what do you mean took out the emotion?
The emotion that people have attached to money.
You're talking about the patients or the doctors?
Well, doctors.
Oh, for sure.
The fear. And you replaced it with logic and truth.
Well, yeah. Tom, what does your dad say about truth? You know, malice may attack it, ignorance may deride it, but in the end, there it is. Not everybody that we're exposing that value to jumps on that bandwagon. In fact, many people are resistant to it. And this is the conversation that they share with me. Well, if I raise my fees, I'm going to lose patients. Patients will not be able to afford the care that I'm offering. My question is always, do you lose patients now because they can't afford it? You know what their answer is? Yes. See, no matter what their price point is, there will be patients who can't afford that price point. There are people who go to the joint and can't get care at the joint, retail, low-value chiropractic care, because they don't have the money to pay for it. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to lose patients, you're going to have people who can't afford care, whether you're at $30 a visit, $60 a visit, or $90 a visit. Why not be at $90 a visit? Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I kind of felt like took over the conversation there, Dr. Tara, but I definitely am very passionate about this subject, and I'd like to see the right starters really embrace this and run with it like we're seeing them do in AMC Aligned. I have a vision, and I've already got her identified. There's a doctor in our group called named Dr. Nicole Mothy. She's a wonderful, wonderful person, excellent doctor. She's a 4th-generation chiropractor. Her daughter, Hannah, is in school for undergrad. Hannah will be a 5th-generation chiropractor in a few years. And I have a concept in my head. You're talking about bad concepts. Mm-hmm. But I have a concept in my head that we're going to open up Hannah Mothy, and we're going to target $200 a visit in CVA. Right? And if Hannah Mothy can do it, and these other people can do it, anybody listening can do it if they know what we know.
Dr. Shannon, I know we're running out against the clock today on this show, but I think we continue this conversation to an extent, because what you just said, when you say $200 a visit, right? There are people that are listening to this show right now that just went, what are you talking about? Right? It's right back to where we started this show.
Sure.
Concepts. Wait a minute. Is it worth it? That's the value. Is it worth it? Well, it all comes back to, is it worth it to the patient? You know, I've got my own stories on that, but I remember when Dr. Owen, we've mentioned him a couple times. I remember when he got those Bell's palsy symptoms, he lost the complete control of his left side of his body. I remember my mom under chiropractic care for 40 years, suffering 3 days a week with migraines, close the door, dark room, right? I still remember it was upper cervical care that took care of both of those situations with them. It was with Dr. Roy Sweat himself. And I remember going up to Roy. I was at a speaking event with Dr. Roy's, and I went up there and wanted to say thank you to him, give him some accolades in front of his group. And as he was, as I was walking off the stage, saying, thank you for taking care of my dad. Thank you for taking care of my mom. And I turned to him, I said, but by the way, Dr. Roy, I said, you charged me $40 a visit. I said, $10,000 a parent wouldn't have been enough. And I stepped off the stage, and everybody was like clapping, and then was like, was that a dig at Dr. Roy? No. He set the value at $40. But what were my parents worth? What are they worth? Right? We need to continue this conversation on another show, Dr. Shannon. But if the students will start with the right concepts, they never deal with these issues.
Not only that, but I feel like, maybe I'm wrong, but every chiropractic student out there goes to school to help people, to change people's lives, to change the world through chiropractic care, and for me to change the profession, right, for the good. And I'm going to be honest with you folks, we cannot do that as a bunch of broken down, struggling chiropractors. We're going to make a
Amen.
much bigger difference in the world, in your community, right? In people's lives. If you're prospering and if you're able to give back to this profession that has given so much to us.
And if you're coming out looking for a job rather than looking for a career, isn't that a concept? Because that's another issue.
You're exactly
the vast
right.
majority of them are coming out of school, and the first thing they're looking for is an associateship.
That's what they've been told.
Well, that's fine, but they're looking for a job. They're not looking for a career that's going to change the world.
I agree.
So they're going to end up broken down, broke, limited values, limited concepts, because the road to associateship is not paved with gold. We can tell you that, right? Because chiropractors do not take care of the young.
Not all of them.
Not, well, in most cases. Let's say that. I shouldn't have said throwing
Watch
everybody
my
in
list
the same
of 40
bucket there,
chiropractors with those golden associateships. Watch out. But yes,
but
besides
few
those.
and far between. Dr. Shannon, I know we need to wrap it up for this show, but thoroughly enjoyed having Dr. Tara on today. I think we need to have her on for another show very soon and continue some of these conversations.
Yeah, this has been a great discussion. I'm fired up. I'm ready to go, ready to run through a brick wall. But Dr. Tara, just appreciate your time. And obviously, listeners, we got the conversation is ongoing. So we will do another round with Dr. Tara, and just appreciate you coming and joining us today, Dr. Tara. I hope all of you who are, oh, my pleasure. Yeah, our pleasure for sure. I hope all of you who are listening work to be better, get better, improve your concepts, right? Get better at that so that you can serve more people and serve them better. And until next time, be blessed.
And one more thing before we go. If you're a chiropractor who's searching for a better way to build a more sustainable, low-stress practice, then you can contact us at amcfamily.com. You can schedule a discovery session, or you can access any of our free content, webinars, podcasts, and the like.